The date is September 26, 1983. Deep beneath the forests outside Moscow, a man sits staring at a computer screen that's about to change everything. In front of him, red warning lights are flashing, alarms are screaming, and his equipment is telling him that nuclear missiles are flying toward his homeland. He has minutes to decide whether to trust the machine or trust his gut. His choice will determine whether you're watching this video today or whether civilization ended over 40 years ago. This is the story of how one Russian officer saved every person on Earth from nuclear annihilation, and most people have never even heard his name. Picture this: you're at work on a quiet night shift. Everything's routine until suddenly every alarm in the building starts going off. Your computer screen shows incoming missiles. Your training tells you to immediately report this to your superiors, who will then launch a counterstrike that could kill hundreds of millions of people. But something feels wrong. The numbers don't add up. The pattern doesn't make sense. What do you do when the fate of humanity rests on your shoulders and you have less than 5 minutes to decide? That impossible situation became reality for Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov on one of the most dangerous nights in human history. But to understand why his decision mattered so much, we need to go back to the beginning of one of the most terrifying periods the world has ever known. The year 1983 wasn't just any year during the Cold War. It was the year when two nuclear superpowers came closer to destroying each other than they ever had before. Think about the most tense, anxiety-inducing situation you've ever been in, then multiply that by 1,000 and spread it across the entire planet. That was the reality for everyone living through this period. The Soviet Union and the United States had been locked in a deadly game of nuclear chess for decades. Each side had enough weapons to obliterate the other multiple times over. The strategy was called mutually assured destruction, and the logic was simple but terrifying. If you attack us, we'll destroy you too, so nobody wins. It was like two people pointing loaded guns at each other's heads, fingers on the triggers, waiting to see who would blink first. By 1983, both sides had thousands of nuclear warheads ready to launch at a moment's notice. These weren't the relatively small bombs that ended World War II. Many of these weapons were 50 times more powerful than what destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A single missile could wipe out an entire city and everything around it for miles. The tension had been building for years. The Soviets had placed new missiles in Eastern Europe. NATO responded by planning to deploy their own missiles across Western Europe. The Americans were developing new weapon systems and talking about winning a nuclear war. The Soviets were convinced their enemies were preparing a surprise attack. Trust between the superpowers had completely broken down. Then, just weeks before our story takes place, something happened that pushed both sides even closer to the edge. A Korean Airlines passenger jet, Flight 007, accidentally flew into Soviet airspace. The plane was carrying 269 innocent people, including women, children, and a United States congressman. Soviet fighter pilots, thinking it was a spy plane, shot it down. Everyone on board died. The world was outraged. The Americans called it murder. The Soviets claimed they were defending their territory from espionage. Neither side was willing to back down or admit fault. The incident poisoned what little communication remained between Moscow and Washington. Fear of nuclear war spread across the globe as millions of people realized how close their leaders were to pressing the button. This is the world Stanislav Petrov lived in. Every day he went to work knowing that his job was to watch for signs of nuclear attack. He worked at a secret facility hidden in the forests south of Moscow. The official name on the gate read Center for the Observation of Celestial Bodies, but everyone knew what really happened inside those concrete walls. It was the nerve center of the Soviet Union's early warning system, designed to detect incoming American missiles and alert the leadership to launch their own devastating response. Petrov wasn't your typical military officer. Yes, he wore the uniform and followed orders, but his background was in engineering and computer science. He understood how the detection systems worked because he had helped build them. He knew their strengths, but he also knew their weaknesses. This knowledge would prove crucial on the night that changed everything. The Soviet early warning system was called OKO, which means eye in Russian. It was a network of satellites orbiting high above the Earth, constantly scanning for the heat signatures of launching missiles. When the satellites detected something suspicious, they would beam the information down to computers that would analyze the data and determine whether an attack was underway. The whole process was designed to work in minutes because that's all the time they would have to respond. On the night of September 26th, Petrov was filling in for a colleague on the night shift. He had done this routine many times before. Usually, the hours passed quietly with nothing more exciting than routine system checks and paperwork. But this night would be different. At 12:15 in the morning, everything changed. The computer systems began detecting what appeared to be a missile launch from an American base in Montana. The satellite data was clear. A nuclear weapon was heading towards Soviet territory. The probability assessment showed maximum confidence. Every protocol demanded immediate action. Petrov's training kicked in. He grabbed the microphone and shouted orders to his team of 80 operators. "Everyone to your stations! Check all equipment and report!" This was exactly what they had drilled for countless times. This was the moment they had all feared might come. But as Petrov stared at his screen, something didn't feel right. The attack showed only one missile. Just one. Why would the Americans launch a single nuclear weapon when their entire strategy was based on overwhelming first strikes? It made no tactical sense. Before Petrov could fully process what he was seeing, the alarm started screaming again. 2 more missiles appeared on his screen, then a 4th, then a 5th. The system was now showing a coordinated attack with multiple warheads inbound. The alert level jumped from launch detected to missile attack confirmed. The computers were telling him with absolute certainty that World War III had just begun. Put yourself in his position for a moment. You're sitting in an underground bunker, responsible for the lives of hundreds of millions of people. Your equipment, built by the smartest engineers in your country, is telling you that enemy missiles are racing toward your homeland at thousands of miles per hour. Every second you delay reporting this attack means fewer Soviet missiles will be able to retaliate before American warheads start exploding over Russian cities. Your colleagues are staring at you, waiting for you to pick up the phone and relay the warning to Moscow. Once you make that call, there's no taking it back. Within minutes, Soviet missiles will be streaking across the Arctic toward American cities. Children will be vaporized in their beds. Entire families will be reduced to shadows on walls. The world as we know it will end, and it will be because you picked up a phone and said 4 words. "We are under attack." But Petrov hesitated. Something in his gut was screaming that this wasn't right. The pattern was all wrong. American military doctrine called for massive, coordinated strikes designed to destroy Soviet command and control before they could respond. Launching just 5 missiles made no strategic sense whatsoever. It would be like trying to kill a bear with a fly swatter. The young lieutenant colonel made a decision that went against every protocol in the book. He decided to trust his instincts over his machines. He reported to his superiors that the warnings were likely false alarms. His exact words were simple but earth-shattering. "I don't think this is a real attack." Can you imagine the weight of that moment? Petrov wasn't just betting his career or his life on this decision. He was betting the survival of human civilization. If he was wrong, and American missiles really were inbound, his failure to report it would mean the Soviet Union couldn't retaliate effectively. If he was right, and he reported a false alarm as real, he would trigger the nuclear holocaust he was trying to prevent. The next 17 minutes were the longest of Petrov's life. That's exactly how long it would take American intercontinental ballistic missiles to travel from their launch sites to Soviet targets. For 17 excruciating minutes, he sat there wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake in human history. His team ran every diagnostic they could think of. The computers were working perfectly. The satellites were functioning normally. Everything looked exactly like it should during a real nuclear attack. But still, something felt fundamentally wrong about the whole situation. Petrov kept thinking about the small number of missiles. The Americans had thousands of nuclear weapons. If they were really going to attack, they would launch everything they had to ensure total victory. They wouldn't risk Soviet retaliation by holding back most of their arsenal. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that his machines were lying to him. As the minutes ticked by, other inconsistencies became apparent. Ground-based radar stations weren't detecting any incoming missiles. Visual confirmation systems showed nothing unusual. The attack seemed to exist only in the data coming from the early warning satellites. 17 minutes passed, then 18, then 20. No explosions lit up the Soviet countryside. No mushroom clouds appeared on the horizon. No secondary impacts were detected anywhere in Soviet territory. Slowly, the horrible truth became clear. Petrov had been right. It was a false alarm. But what had caused such a catastrophic failure of the warning system? The investigation that followed revealed a perfect storm of technological mishaps and cosmic bad luck. High-altitude clouds had aligned in just the right way to reflect sunlight directly into the satellite sensors. The time of day created the perfect conditions for this reflection to be mistaken for the heat signature of launching missiles. The satellites were positioned at exactly the wrong angle to properly distinguish between sunlight and rocket exhaust. Even more chilling was the location where this optical illusion occurred. The false launches appeared to originate from Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, one of America's primary nuclear missile facilities. If you were going to design a false alarm to look as realistic as possible, you couldn't have chosen a more convincing location. The system was quickly upgraded to prevent similar incidents, but the damage to trust in automated systems was done. Petrov had proven that human judgment could be more reliable than computer analysis, even when dealing with the most advanced technology available. Yet, despite saving the world from nuclear annihilation, Petrov received no recognition from his government. Instead, he was reprimanded for failing to properly document the incident. His superiors were more interested in covering up the system's failure than celebrating his good judgment. Within a year, he was quietly forced out of the military. For decades, almost nobody knew what had happened that September night. Petrov moved to a small apartment outside Moscow and worked at low-paying jobs. His pension was tiny. He couldn't afford a telephone. Sometimes he had to search for food. When his wife became seriously ill, he cared for her until she died in 1997, and he faced his grief alone. It wasn't until after the Soviet Union collapsed that the story began to emerge. A German journalist discovered the forgotten hero living in poverty and helped bring his story to the world. Finally, Petrov received the recognition he deserved, but only from foreign governments and international organizations. His own country remained largely silent about his actions. Petrov always insisted he wasn't a hero. He said he was just doing his job and following his training to think critically about the information he received. But he also acknowledged something profound. The world can be grateful that I was on duty that night and not some hot-headed military man who might have followed orders without question. Stanislav Petrov died quietly in 2017 at the age of 77. The man who prevented nuclear war passed away in obscurity, and the world only learned of his death months later when a friend placed an obituary in a German newspaper. Today, more than 40 years later, nuclear weapons remain one of humanity's greatest threats. The treaties that helped reduce tensions during the Cold War have expired or been abandoned. New countries have joined the nuclear club. The doomsday clock, maintained by nuclear scientists to measure how close we are to global catastrophe, shows we're closer to midnight than we've been since the height of the Cold War. The story of Stanislav Petrov reminds us that sometimes the most important decisions in history are made not by presidents or generals, but by ordinary people who choose to think for themselves when it matters most. In a world where technology increasingly makes decisions for us, Petrov's legacy is a reminder that human judgment, intuition, and the courage to question authority can literally save the world. The next time you're faced with a difficult decision, remember the Russian lieutenant colonel who trusted his gut over his computer and prevented the end of civilization. Sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is simply refuse to press the button.